Right. Monthly work plan through September. Can I just say before we hand it over, this is what I see in other papers around the country. This is a very, very good report, and takes a lot of angst and consternation out of a lot of conversations. So I would like to think that this might survive the triennium and be a part of next triennium. But anyway, open to questions. Councillor
Survived the last one. I say it survived the last one. So there's no reason why it shouldn't survive the next.
Profound. Okay, other questions? Councillor Scott.
A couple of questions on page 76 around the open spaces. One is, can you explain the position of the Tutera Manaaiwi project leader? And secondly, how serious was the wind damage in Pakawai Country Park? It sounds, how extensive was it? It sounds pretty unpleasant.
I did have a walk through Pakawai Country Park actually, and I didn't notice anything significant, but obviously there was some cleaning up to do. So I haven't sort of had a detailed report from Steve, but didn't notice anything too drastic. And with regard to the Tutera, that is really in the hands of Mangahuru Tangatu with regard to the appointment of their project manager. I know they have interviewed a number of people. I am not sure whether or not they have actually appointed, but they did end up with a shortlist, but I can't update you on that.
Thank you. Mr. Mohi?
Regarding number 56, Panpax and Mangahuru case, which was in the Environment Court last week for 3.5 days, and the judge has given both parties 10 days to file their final summations, and probably another 20 days after that to get the appeal, get the decision from the court. Given that next year, they will be applying for renewing the consent.
Thank you. Okay, working around the table, I think Councillor Balfour.
Just on number 53, the Whakatu wool scours, that had been delayed a bit because the commercial issue involved. Should I infer from this that what's now happened is they're going to stay in business there and now have, so the consent has moved ahead and been approved?
Yeah, so the consent's been issued on the 18th, and it's still within the appeal period for the Environment Court appeal process.
But am I right? So that means they're staying.
So we moved the consent process here. We basically had put it on, well, not quite put it on hold, but delayed it while there was a Commerce Commission process underway. That was stalled or delayed. It wasn't going anywhere. So we pushed on into the consenting process and have delivered that result. Whether they stay on the site or not, I don't know, because as I understand it, there's still the possibility of takeovers or amalgamation of the activity, and potentially for it to be moved off-site.
So, but from the local resident standpoint, the meaning of this is that if they choose to stay there, they now have a consent to.
Correct.
Is that right? Assuming
it's not appealed and there are not subsequent changes.
Right.
Short-term consent, extremely short-term consent. It's the shortest term consent I think we have ever issued.
Christine, what is that length? Do you know?
It is until the end of next year.
End of next year.
Okay, Councillor Bevan.
Number 26, ongoing assistance with residential developments in Hastings. Have we got this right? Howard Street, Ada Street? I thought it was Howard Street, Hastings, Havelock Road. That was the residential development. So that's my first question.
Yeah, I can't answer that one, sorry.
I'm not aware of any proposal regarding the area between Howard and Ada Streets at all. In fact, that's all orchard there.
I suggest you catch up with me afterwards and I'll be able to ask the right questions to the right people.
So that was my first question. Second question is, what type of assistance are we offering?
Again, yep, come upstairs and I'll answer that one. I don't know on that one.
All right, let me try my next question. which is the next point 27, I have seen a digger operating there. What's it doing?
We are doing some work just upstream of the river mouth in terms of protecting that stop bank. I'm not, so that's the main area of work. I think there could be a little bit of extra stuff being put on the
Is this like
groins.
repairs to the groin or something?
There may be a little bit if there's some material left over, but it's mainly in the river.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, just
And
up.
for clarity, councillor, it's not available to build your whitebait stand. So.
No.
No, well, I go in on the other side of the river, so I only see it
Yeah.
at a distance. That's what I'm asking. My other questions are in the late 60s, early 70s. There are a number of investigations and reports that will flow from that work. I presume that's to feed into the tank process, and I'm just wondering what the timeframes are.
By and large, they are, albeit there's Mohaka stuff, Taharua there, but the vast majority of the science effort at the moment is focused on the tank. And as that information's ready, it'll go to the RPC. The reports will flow into the RPC for adoption, and then into the tank process.
Answer my question. How far away are we?
Oh, look, I couldn't tell you off the top of my head what the dates are. Could certainly bring you back a timeline. We'll provide you. I could email you a timeline on the key elements.
Yeah,
Councillor
I presume there's quite a body of work to be done in the Havelock North Water investigation, and I don't know whether I've missed it, but the only area that I saw in the September monthly work plan was in emergency management.
So I've
So did you do this before all that happened?
no. In fact, I didn't do my bit at all.
Okay.
So this is a hangover from probably the June meeting, my one. So I apologise for that, because I was going to be my, if you like, my headline.
Yeah.
In terms of the work that's coming out of the CE's office. And the last Thursday was exceptionally busy, and I overlooked updating the agenda. But you're right. I mean, there's quite a team of us working on it. Some full time, some more than full time, and some not quite. But my two fellow execs, Ian and James, but also Stephen Swaby, and a number of his science staff, and Wayne Wright, and a number of his resource use staff as well.
Thank you. Other questions? Further? Just moved and seconded. No further questions. Thank you. You wish to speak? Seconder, you good?
I'd just like to endorse what you said. Huge amount of work going on.
Oh, yeah. No further speakers. Put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. And to the contrary, no. Carried. Thank you. Right, where are we up to now? Minor items. So shall we kick that off with a report on the water? Or do you want to do that at the end?
Just go through these other ones.
Okay, well, I'm just wondering, looking at them.
Mr. Chairman,
We
could you
did the
do,
report first. We'll
could you do
probably
it now?
answer some of the questions at the end.
yeah.
Well,
Could you do it now? Because I have to leave here for a while in about 20 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we should do it
If we could
first.
just have a minute for Stephen to load up his
That's
presentation.
fine. Go on then, you go. Stock effluent, I think it was.
You may be aware that David Parker, the Labor Party environmental guy, visited yesterday. I had a cup of tea with him in the morning. He went out and visited sites in the Nararora and sites in Tukitu. He wanted me to go with him, but I didn't have time. I had watched Lily's netball. But he took photos, which I have, and pretty stunning. He made a little speech last night, and there's going to be huge ramifications for what he saw on both rivers, the disgraceful management of stock close to our rivers, both rivers, but especially in Tukituk, from feedlots and just heavy grazing next to the rivers, cattle in mud. He thinks that they were illegal, but whether they were or not, he doesn't know. But certainly, we're going to take some heat. Just want to let everyone know that. My second item was.
Did you tell him we've got something called Plan Change 6?
I don't think they care anymore.
Pardon?
It's.
Just how,
Well,
Councillor
We
Dick,
haven't got plan change 6 on the Narrora.
Councillor Dick, we're just
No, I know.
in,
The precedent's there.
Councillor Dick, we're in minor items, we can ask these questions in
You
the
can ask that.
special.
I'm just reporting that the photos, which anyone, it's on my camera because he sent them to me. Also, and I'm sorry I haven't brought it along, there was a community meeting which I understand Councillor Balfour attended in Hastings on Thursday night. They did a list of questions which were handed to me, and I promised faithfully I would give them to Mr. Maxwell, so they're still in my office at home, so I'll get those to you. I just want to raise that there's a concern of a community group, and they have a list of questions that they would like us to answer.
Let's go to this and then we'll come back to your minor items. Councillor Barker, so Mr. Swaby.
Thanks very much, Chair. What I'm going to do is to present the slightly modified version of what was presented to the public meeting last night. It's modified in a way which gives greater clarity to some of the points that were being made that evidently could not be seen readily in the context of the hall that we were using, but the substantive content is the same. So here I'm introducing the area to identify where the bores which are used for the Havelock North water supply are with respect to both the Tuki River at the top of the image and Havelock North itself. As we can see, the river's flowing down the eastern boundary of the area of gravels and sediments in which the water supply bores are situated. The issue we're dealing with is contamination of a bore which is used for water supply. It's actually a series of 3 bores, and these are the main features of a typical water supply bore, which might be useful to understand when thinking about where contamination may occur. So in the main part of the bore, a pump sits. In this case, it's a submersible pump used by Hastings District that lifts water to a pipe network, which then in the the Havelock North example, goes to a further pumping shed for distribution through the reticulation network. In the case of the Havelock North bores, 2 of them are situated with their headworks in a headworks chamber partially sunk into the ground. Then underlying that are a range of layers of sediments. In most situations you'd have a fully impermeable layer, and underneath that a permeable aquifer from which you draw the water. There's a screen typically placed down these sorts of bores, and that's the point at which the pump is usually situated and where the water enters from the aquifer. The water table here is shown as coning down towards the screen, and that reflects the general conditions that happen when the bore is being pumped for water supply. Now in this image we've got groundwater flow coming in from the right. In the case of Havelock North, that's from the south and the east, particularly from the Tuki River. And this then indicates potential contamination pathways. One of those is through the groundwater itself, and another is around the headworks of the water supply bore, much more locally. And then the third potential major contamination avenue is through in the headworks chamber and through pipework that exists. I'm not suggesting that that's the case in this particular situation. So the approach that we've taken to our investigation of the source of contamination has been developed in part with the assistance of the Environmental Science and Research Institute, and the scientists there have been really helpful to us. What we're doing is focusing our work on identifying potential environmental sources of contaminated feces, and then also the vectors by which, the pathways by which transmission might occur to the water supply bores. Because what we're doing is relatively expensive testing work, what we don't want to do is test for Campylobacter directly everywhere. That'll take a long time and it's a lot of money. So what instead is the approach we're taking is first to test for the presence of Escherichia coli, which is an indicator of poos, fecal contamination, and then if that's present, we further test for Campylobacter. If Campylobacter are present, we then test to see whether they're from birds, avian, human sources, or from ruminants, so from stock, particularly sheep and cattle. The key message I gave the last time I talked about this to members of the elected representatives of HBRC was that it's unlikely that this contamination has originated from the Tukituki River. And the reason that we draw that conclusion is that although the Tukituki River has low levels of E. coli present, indicated in the tan squares situated in the riverbed, those levels are typical of environmental conditions in the Tukituki catchment, and they're well below the values that would suggest it would be unsuitable for swimming. That's a level of 130 counts per 100 mils. So the values typically we see are in the 20s. What you're also seeing in this image is a series of green squares, and those represent the groundwater sites where there's no E. coli present. Then there are a series of purple squares which show bores where there are low levels of total coliforms. Now, total coliforms are all the coliform species that are tested for, and it includes E. coli and other things. And the other things may be derived not from poo, but from soil or vegetation. So where you see total coliforms and no E. coli, it means that there's contamination by something like soil. And as you can see in this image, the bores that lie between the Tukituki River and the water supply bores at the top of the image are clear for E. coli, and some of them have low levels of total coliforms.
Sorry, can I just stop you there just for a sec, Steve?
Yep.
Because you did this last night as well, and you've been here long enough. Please say Tukituk. Several people said to me, how come your scientist doesn't know the name of that river? It's Tukituk, not Tukituk. Please.
My apologies for my accent. I will sort that out. The brown blob on the left-hand side is the tomato mushroom site, where there's a bore which has high total coliforms present, but those don't include E. coli. So in what we're seeing here, there's no E. coli present in any of the bores. E. coli, particularly importantly, is not present in groundwater near the water supply bores themselves.
Did I understand one of the Hastings guys last night, though, to say that even as of yesterday, I thought he said there is still contamination in the bores. What was he referring to?
So he's probably referring to the water supply bores rather than the bores that we monitor, and we've been doing monitoring it.
So can you comment on where would contamination today be coming from in those, or are you going to get to that?
I'll get to that, yes, absolutely. So whilst there is lingering contamination at low levels in the water supply bores, we don't have that directly from evidence that we've been given. We have that reporting indirectly from Hastings District. But what our monitoring shows is that in the bores surrounding this area, there is no E. coli present at the moment.
That one. So which one are they pumping from? So three's closest to the mushroom farm.
That's
correct?
right. So 3 has been closed historically.
It's got no lid on it. What I was saying. Yeah.
Okay. Bore 2 and Bore 1 have been pumped in recent times. So,
and it's those two that are
those are the ones that
okay.
are the source of potential contamination.
Thank you.
Again, we don't have information at the moment that indicates what exactly the pattern of pumping was, and that's something that we've also sought from Hastings District. But, and you've seen this before in part, some of you, that there are high levels of E. coli present in local surface water. So in this view, we're looking to the southwest across the tomato mushroom site on the right-hand side of the bores that are used for water supply. In various drains around the site, E. coli levels are very high, beyond the level of the maximum counting level for some of these processes. And that includes internal drains to the south and east of the tomato mushroom site, and in the drain that leaves the site and passes underneath Brookvale Road. Importantly, there's also a sample that we've taken in the drain upstream of the Brookvale Road near bore 1210, where E. coli is also very high.
So do you know which way the land flows?
The
Which way does the land flow?
Yeah, so high on the left, it's flowing down to the right. So surface water would flow from the left-hand side of the image as you view it to the right-hand side of the image.
And where do the drains discharge into?
So they'll go down to the in our work, we've set out to sample several times in both the surface water and groundwater features. And the reason for this is that a single sampling point in time may have missed a particular slug of contaminants passing through. We began our sampling on the 16th of August, and the third round of sampling began just a few days ago. We've yet to complete the third round, and once we do that, we'll assess the data and determine whether or not there's any trends in the data that indicate contaminants passing through or the presence of contaminants. The work that's been done by Hastings District suggests that Campylobacter has a ruminant origin, and that's something that we're also testing for, as I mentioned earlier. The work that we're doing on typing Campylobacter is likely to be available to us late tomorrow afternoon, and we'll be then using that to assess what we do next in terms of the sampling protocols we follow. We've also undertaken some work to try and understand potential pathways by which contaminants might move through the systems, and that includes groundwater modelling of typical flow paths in the groundwater between the Tucky River and, is that better? Tucky River, Tucky River, Bangy! And the area around the water supply bores. That has been complemented by some relatively basic flood flow modelling, which seeks to identify what happened during the 8th of August rainfall event. Now, this is 2D modelling. It's intended to understand how water that falls on the ground is conveyed to drains and streams and moves through the surface water environment. What we're interested in here is whether or not there were pathways on the surface of the ground that might have conveyed contaminants to the vicinity of the water supply bores, if in fact there was a connection between the surface water and the bores which would allow those contaminants into those bores. And that's something which I refer to at the bottom. What we have advice from ESR on is that it is unlikely that Campylobacter would survive any great distance of travel. And so it's more likely that the source of Campylobacter is quite close to the water supply bores. This is something that's borne out by the significant size of the incident of ill health in Havelock North. It requires a significant load of Campylobacter in the water supply bores to make that many people ill. So one of the things we're looking for is a significant source in terms of volume, relatively close to the water supply bores that can be connected hydraulically and hydrologically to those water supply bores. And the three candidates you see at the bottom are those.
Sorry, when you talk about chambers containing water supply pipes and systems, is this where you were saying the headworks are in a chamber which is below ground level?
That's right. So bores 1 and 2 have a chamber in which the headworks, including the pipes and electrical cables and so on, sit below the ground.
Why the hell would you build them below ground level?
It's a question you probably need to direct at Hastings DC.
Well,
Their third chamber is built above the ground.
just doesn't make sense.
Okay, so the three types of tracing that we propose to do is to look at the connections that may exist between the Mangateri stream, which is the stream that runs immediately to the east of the water supply bores, between paddocks that sit around the water supply bores within the cone of depression. That's the area of that water table you saw in the first diagram that's dipping down towards the intake on the bores, and whether the chambers themselves are connected through some holes within the supply pipes and systems which would allow contamination from the chambers into the bore itself. So the first two elements of this work will be undertaken by dye tracing using fluorometric dyes, and that'll happen next week, we anticipate. And the third element is likely to occur at a similar time once we've determined an appropriate way of checking the link between the chambers and the bores. Not on this slide, and something that we've looked at recently this morning, is also testing using a vacuum pump whether the bores are integral, whether there's any air leaks that occur in the bores if you apply a vacuum to them. Now, all of these tests are intended to be non-intrusive in the sense that they don't require us to break apart any of the Hastings District Council's headworks. And once we've completed these tests, if they're conclusive, we may not need to do that. If they're inconclusive, we may also wish to deconstruct the bores and understand what's happened inside them. And that's not a small amount of work, so we prefer to do that when we're certain that we don't need to do anything further with them in situ. So just to remind you of where that work will take place, the tracing from the Mangateri stream is literally 60 metres from bore 1, about 130 or so from bore 2, so very close in and within that cone of depression. If the source of contamination is in the paddocks surrounding the bore headworks, that's likely to be within 40 or 50 metres of the headworks that will do that testing. And if we're testing in the headworks chambers, obviously it's directly over the top of the bore. And that's, I'd invite questions.
Mr. Chairman, you're talking about links to the Mangateri stream. Basically what you're saying is that the aquifer there, which is relatively shallow, is not in fact fully contained.
Yes, that's right, Councillor. There's several lines of evidence which suggest that the Mangateri stream is partially connected to the aquifer that underlies it. This includes work that's been done by Hastings DC and made recently available by GNS that indicates the age of water in the bores is relatively young, and some of the work that was done in 2008 which identified that the stream, the Mangateri stream, was losing water to the groundwater.
So if you come to that conclusion, those bores got to be shut down, don't they?
I'm not a bore engineer, so I wouldn't like to comment.
Well, I mean, you can't pump from a uncontained or semi-contained aquifer at a shallow level that's being fed by a stream that inevitably will have contaminant.
So Councillor, I think that's probably something that the District Council will need to traverse as the water supplier in terms of deciding whether they stick with that area, and if they do, how they do that. And recognising, of course, that in the consent replacement process that occurred in 2008, there was a side agreement reached between the District Council and Ngāti Kahungunu to move the bore field to another location, recognising the stream depletion effects on the nearby Mangateri stream. So that work will probably be accelerated. I mean, as we understand it, the District Council have already moved the Havelock North supply to Hastings sources, so it's coming from Hastings. That they want to keep these just as reserve or backup in the interim, but I would imagine they'll be looking at in haste at other options in terms of where they want to go.
Just, I have a question before we open it up to the Chief Executive. Just how are we paying for all this?
Cash, IOUs. Look, it's unbudgeted expenditure, and as I sort of described in response to a question earlier, there's a range of parts of council that are involved in this. There's external expenditure as well. We're taking legal advice. We're also obviously having sent away in the vicinity of about 80 samples for testing already, and that's not cheap either. So there's a significant amount of external expenditure. In terms of our internal time, we're coding that to a specific job code that's been set up for this kind of investigation, and it's our time's being absorbed by that for now. The external expenditure is something that we'll have to come back to council to give you we will be coming back to you, or at least giving you an update on that in the September council meeting, so you can start to get an appreciation of the level of expenditure that's involved.
Right, further questions?
What is the name of that big river again?
Give it a go. Give it a go.
Just thanks, Steve. I took my daughter for a swim in the Tuki. Thank you. Think about it that way.
When was this, Peter?
Last week.
Are you sure it was your daughter?
Yeah, hang on.
Mr. Chairman.
Further
there's a
questions, Councillor.
Political candidate who's made the accusation publicly that the Regional Council has been remiss in its obligation to monitor its water supply bores, and it's running for cover and in the blame game, to paraphrase it. Is there any truth in that?
We don't have water supply bores, councillor.
I just asked whether there's any truth in the statement.
I mean, we obviously have our state of the environment monitoring, which is done on a regular basis. You receive regular updates on that through the various science reports. That's all I, want to say about that. But Ian, I don't know if you want to add anything else.
So, yeah, look, we've been active in the investigation phase on this since Monday. Following the weekend, the outbreak was publicised, and we remain active in that investigation phase. That is our focus at the moment, understanding how this happened and how to prevent it happening again in the future. All of the issues around responsibilities and duties will be traversed at length, I'm quite sure, through the government-led inquiry. That's probably the best place for them.
I think it was a bit of a low blow and unjustified, but excuse me for half an hour.
Excuse me, Councillor Bevan.
Thank you. This is the third session we've had as a full council group to get updates on this. The last one was last Wednesday when you gave us a presentation, Steve, and at the time, amongst other things, you told us that the water was on average 40 years old in the bore. What you didn't tell us was that there was water that had been found in the bore that was less than a year old. Did you know that at the time you were reporting to us?
No, so the report on which I gave you the information last time we talked about this was the one which had been used in 2011 to report on the security of supply to Hastings District Council. Since then, GNS released a partially complete report that identified there'd been a change of the age of the water that arrives at the water supply bores. And so between that date and then, I've had a look at that early information, and it indicates that the age is much younger.
Okay, so there was a letter that went to Hastings District from us, and you copied it to all of us councillors after it went, within 1 day of that, less than 1 day. So does that mean that you got that information in the...
Yes, so Councillor, that information came to us after that update, and it came to us through our lines of inquiry by staff, and we didn't join the dots on the significance of it until later that afternoon, so it was after we presented to you.
So what I don't know is whether any councillor had this discussed with them before that letter went to the Hastings District Council. I certainly wasn't. It's in my ward, and I would have thought that, having reflected on this, all of us Hastings councillors might have had an opinion about what we were doing, even though I know it's your delegated authority to do it.
So yes, councillor.
So was anybody discussed with us?
So the only person that was informed just prior to the delivery of the letter was the council chairman, who was advised so that he could call the Hastings mayor at the time that I was calling the Hastings District CEO. Aside from that, exactly the reason that you just outlined, whether or not you councillors have an opinion. It's quite clear from the Office of Auditor General rulings that any decision around regulatory enforcement matters are to be kept clear from political influence. So the risk in advising you beforehand was exactly that. So we don't want to have that as a means of being challenged later on. And we haven't done it in the past. We've never informed you ahead of taking. We've informed you as soon as we can after that decision has been made, but not beforehand.
So why, given that the government had already announced that they were going to do their own investigation, why did we decide not to feed this information into that rather than have our own separate one?
So we still have the opportunity to feed any information that we find from this investigation into the government inquiry. But the draft terms of reference, and I have to emphasise they are draft, we haven't seen any updates, but they were the draft terms of reference that we saw, did not preclude any other type of investigations that we or any other agency might want to take under their own statutory responsibilities. We clearly have statutory responsibilities under the Resource Management Act. Other agencies have responsibilities under, for example, the Health Act, and they may well want to do investigations and inquiries of their own. But the government independent inquiry did not preclude us from taking that action.
I understand you have the right to do it. I'm questioning why we would have done it. In the back of my car, I've got 6 or 8 water containers, and I'm going to go around to Rex's place on the way home. I'm going to fill them up and take them home, and they're going to go in our kitchen, and I've been doing that for the last 3 weeks. That's how I'm living, and that's how a lot of people in Havelock are living, and they all feel the same as me. They're not interested in councils pointing fingers at each other around here. What they want is a high level of cooperation and to get on top of this problem, and I'm really concerned about the response that we've had to what we've done.
So we have acknowledged that, obviously the inconvenience ranging right through to distress that it's caused residents in Havelock North around this issue. We have worked collaboratively with the other agencies right through this whole process. Even now, I'll pick up the phone and talk to Ross and whatever, and we are working collaboratively. Now, the finger pointing may have been a headline in the paper, but in fact, we all want the same outcome. We want to find out what the cause is and make sure it doesn't happen again.
I'd just like to comment. I went to the meeting last night. I thought, Stephen, you were quite outstanding at the meeting, calm and really concise, and I thought we did a really good job. And as a matter of fact, I've been really proud of our team getting in and helping and talk to Ian on a daily basis. And I've had to defend this because people think that we're missing in action. And of course we haven't been missing in action. We've been out there doing the job, but we haven't been telling anyone about that. So that's been, the public think we're missing in action until last night, and hopefully that got through to them. But I hear what you say, Liz, but it would have been really good for you to tell us on the Wednesday. When you're all running around like flies in paper bags, it was clear something was up, you could have just told us.
Can I just explain that? I mean, I think the presentation was first thing at your committee meeting on the Wednesday morning when I happened to be meeting with Ross McLeod and Kevin Snee. At that stage, Councillor, we didn't have that evidence that we've talked about that was presented, including the letter. We did not have it. So we were still, and we still have a very open mind about the source of the contamination, but we did not have that particular piece of evidence.
So Council, perhaps just responding to your point too, Councillor, just in terms of our visibility on this, and to be very clear, from the Monday after the weekend that occurred, we were in action basically. And I've just done a quick summary of hours spent, and so far, at the end of our last fortnightly pay period and timesheet period, there's about 880 person hours has been assigned to this work across the organisation, and that's only going to increase over time. So
we all accept it.
Yeah, I know. I guess I'm just giving you that information so you can provide it to others.
So we've done a wonderful job out there, but we've done a terrible political job, and we've put the relationships with Hawke's Bay Regional Council and even the people, up until last night, and I think a lot of wounds were healed last night, but up until then, I was just taking crap out in the field, and certainly from the politicians in Hastings, we are not flavour of the month, big time, and Fenton can attest to that. They're not. This is going to take a lot of healing, and even if I could have said to them, I did know, but I wasn't able to tell you, but we were informed that this was going to take place, would have been entirely different. Whatever we do, it's very important that the perception of the community is that we're all working together. And I think last night helped to get that across the line, that we're all working together. But up until then, they didn't see us working together. They saw us as outside it. I think we did a really bad PR job.
Councillor Scott.
Chairman, can I just make the observation that in the early 2000s in a town called Walkerton in Ontario, Canada, there was a Campylobacter and E. coli outbreak as a result of a whole range of issues about the management of the groundwater bores in that town. There was a subsequent inquiry that was undertaken with extensive recommendations that are cited internationally as the benchmark for the management of public health around these issues. One of the key recommendations of that report was that in the Walkerton incident, local authorities who had responsibilities for different parts of the regulatory framework, including overseeing one another, worked too closely together and did not keep due separation in their responsibilities. And so while I understand that the good people of Havelock North simply want to see everybody walking together, there are clear statutory boundaries, some of the detail of which we provided to you last night in writing, with different responsibilities for different agencies, and ensuring the integrity of the separation of those institutions throughout will be a key issue that will be traversed by the government-led inquiry. So our conduct on this will be under scrutiny.
Mr. Chairman, I think at the last meeting, at the last update that we had at our previous meeting, that we had at that stage not been officially informed, and yet had put forward to Hastings our willingness to assist, and they had been provided with all the information up to date. Was that correct? So if we're looking at political stance on this, I don't think that it's this council that's been taking a political stance, is it? Or is officially, might have privately.
Not officially, but the conversations still go on in the background.
And my second question is, do we actually have a regulatory function that actually obliges us to investigate when there is a breach of condition? So we were required to, under statute, to further this investigation.
And look, I'd just also perhaps emphasise the point that what we're doing here is investigating, so there's no enforcement action proposed or nothing. I mean, the worst thing that could come out of this is that it doesn't put us any further ahead in terms of understanding this. It may well give us some answers, I don't know. All we're doing is investigating. There's no enforcement action attached to it.
Thank you. My third question is, I'm not sure what the boundaries are, but it seems to me fairly apparent from the map of the constituency boundaries that this is in the Hastings constituency. Perhaps Councillor Bevan could clarify when he refers to his ward, does he mean just where he lives?
That doesn't, look, we're all in this together, simple as that. We're all in this together. Any other questions? Look, let's move on. Councillor Barker.
I just want to try and be helpful here. I've had some experience of these situations, and there is always a tension between the sort of the operational matters that people deal with every day, as you've expressed, James. You get that? People have jobs to do and things to do that. There is also, on the other side of it, the point that Rex is articulating is the public perception, and they are quite different. And in every emergency response, there are two things that run here. One is the operational staff doing what they have to do to fix things and do things. But the public also expect to hear clear messages. Now, Rudy Giuliani is held up as one of the great exponents of this. Rudy Giuliani never clambered up a building. Rudy Giuliani didn't pull anybody out, do anything. But Rudy Giuliani was on the street talking all the day to the cameras, to the people, explaining that things were going on. And the fact that he was talking to them and telling them things gave people reassurance. That's where he got his mandate from. That's where he got his credit from. But he didn't actually do anything himself. So you have to have a leadership focus in managing this and talking to the people. What Rex is identifying is that in that process there, let's be clear, our staff doing the operational things did a fantastic job. Competent, able, no one has anything but praise for them in that. All the reports I've seen, very able. Every report I've heard on the report, Havelock North didn't go last night, will go tonight, excellent about our council staff, no problem. What they are saying though is that from their perception, at a leadership level, the councils, put them all together,
didn't do what they should have done. You with me? They don't feel that. You can't put anything on it, but there is a disjunct there. And it wasn't happened by 2 or 3 minor things, which the media get hold of and everybody plays it. So the point that Rex is making is we need to be clearer about the style of leadership we adopt and project through doing these things, which is completely different from all of our operational things. And you're right, we need to do them and do them to high standard. But we sometimes, when we're doing those things, forget the other part of it or don't manage it very well. And I can give you numerous examples where we've had a failure of that around the country, different things. But that's what the public perception is. And the perception becomes a reality, unfortunately. There's nothing you can say to shift it. So I just think we need to learn a bit of a lesson here on how we manage the comms, who does what, who says what, how often, and on occasions you simply cannot say enough.
Just to add to that, one of the key things that Rudy Giuliani did was they had scenario planning, and that might be something that we look to as we fall out with the lessons learned in this. You know, what can go wrong, because they had done exactly that scenario. And yes, I agree, he was a superb example of leadership. But some people learn under fire rather than under a book.
Scott for light.
Just before we get too carried away, I think Lawrence has taken that role superbly. I don't know what everyone's on about.
I can give you a half dozen things. I don't want to be critical. I think we just need to do this in a quiet way, pick up, and the impression I get from the community is reduction, readiness, response and recovery. And the 5th R is recrimination, and it's always there. So we need to accept that, but what you've got to do is to manage it so that you minimise it to the best degree. There's no perfect example of this, but I just make the point again, the communications, how people communicated, what was done, is caused, it's been, people's public see it as being less than perfect. Whether they're right or not doesn't matter. Doesn't matter, so that's what they believe.
Any further questions? Let's move on with the meeting. Councillor Scott.
General one, your presentation affirmed what you said last week, that the source is not coming from the tuki, and you did say last week you never say never, but you were very highly certain that that was the case, that it's not linked to Ruataniwha and it is not linked to dairy farming.
That's certainly the data that we have to date, and I reaffirm that view that I gave you last week, that it's not related to the tuki, and it's not related to land use that's over the aquifer between the river and some distance from the bores. What we're trying to ascertain is how close to the bores land use effects may be felt at the bores by the work that we're doing at the moment.
Thank you.
No. There's a question. The word on the street, the rumour is that the regional council has hired May Chen as a law firm to help run our case in this. Is that true or not?
Yes, Councillor, as I advised you in my update last week, it is correct.
Okay, thank you. Right, let's get back to minor items. Feedlots, Councillor Barker.
The US example generally on hard concrete pads, and the cattle are managed, the effluent and so on flow off is managed, and proper sewage system and so on. But there has been because of the price of beef, there's more and more beef being held on land and fed on what they call feedlots, but they're not hard pan, they're just soft areas. The land is being plugged up, and there's a substantial amount of stock being held on, much higher stocking rate than you'd normally have. And the concern is that there's therefore a significant outflow of effluent from this. Now, the issue here is that whilst the people have the right to farm the land, not every practice is acceptable. So what I would like to have some advice from the council on is having a feedlot of this nature a notifiable action or not? And what do we do to monitor this? Because there are a number of feedlots which are very close to our river systems, and there is no process obvious from the road of seeing how the intensification of the stocking rates and the consequential increase in effluent going to the land is being managed and controlled.
Thank you. And Stock and Waterway?
Yes, Stock and Waterways, there was a bit of a buzz around this on the last week in the media, and it was very interesting to say that someone made the think that rivers should be protected and farmers should be changing their practices, things we've had a discussion with about here for quite a long time. And we've always run up against the fact that we have to have plan changes and so on and do it the legal way. Well, it's very interesting that in the paper, the Federated Farmers President Will Foley agreed that this was an issue. He goes on, quote, "We should fast-track the practice and not wait for deadlines. We just need to get on and do it," end of quotes. In some areas, a considerable investment fencing was needed. Open quotes, we can't expect it to happen overnight, but we need to get on and get it done, close quotes, Mr. Foley said. So that seemed to me to be an open invitation by the President of Federated Farmers locally to engage in a conversation to make progress on this issue. And I think we should in some way invite Federated Farmers either to this meeting or staff or you as the chair, invite them and say we welcome the comments. How do we get on and make this happen? Because it would be silly of us to let such an invitation pass by without taking it up.
Noted, thank you.
Can
Can
we not?
No, not in minor items. You're politicking otherwise. Energy Futures meeting, Councillor Belford.
We had a meeting of the of a group assembled to talk about energy futures and how a variety of stakeholders might plot some sort of future strategy in that area. It was 25 people met from industry, iwi, environmentalists, councils, pretty good cross-section of folks. It was a pretty 50,000-foot discussion, I would say, at that point. But there were some themes, affordability, resilience, lowering the environmental footprint, energy efficiency, cultural interests, that was agreed basically that we should move toward defining something that laid those basic principles out and then ask the various participants, and this, as I say, was from Unison to Paul Bailey, pretty much the spectrum, that and the Hastings Council and what have you. So the folks would next step, I guess, would be for those folks to identify what they were currently doing in the energy arena that might address or fall within one of those themes, so we could kind of get a sense of where people were at, with an interest then in moving beyond that to identifying some opportunities to do things better in those various realms. So there wasn't any really specific discussion of any area other, I would say, than energy security. We had quite a bit of discussion of how electricity gets to Hawke's Bay and what happens when it doesn't get there and what the redundancies are or aren't in that system and how those risks could be better mitigated. But that was a whole that was probably the only issue of a number of issues that got discussed with any kind of detail. And it happened, I think, that way because there happened to be a lot of expertise in the room around that subject as opposed to, say, biomass or whatever, because there were other issues that were also on the table. So I think we committed to regrouping in somewhere in the 3-month realm to gather this feedback from them, report it back to them, and then have another go at this. So,
thank you. And Coastal Hazards Committee meeting, Councillor Bevan.
Thank you, Chair. Well, the Joint Hazards Committee of the 3 councils has met for the last time, and it had a information session for all councillors from all 3 councils a few days ago. Unfortunately, the only 2 others who attended from this council were the two retiring councillors, but I do thank them for their attendance. So it's a 4-step process, and we're pretty much through the second step. The first step was identifying the hazards and what might be at risk. The second step that we're pretty much completed is basically creating a framework to develop a response. The decision's been made to divide the coastline into 2 cells, Port North, Port South, which of course involves all 3 councils in both cells. There will be a reference group of about 15 people taken from the local communities and businesses in each of the reference groups, 1 for each cell. There will be extra people from the advisory group and councillors, and they will develop the response. At the same time, there's been a funding model that's been discussed, or a funding framework, if you like, and there are a series of recommendations that have fallen out of the Joint Committee's decision, which will come back to all councils for adoption, and it contains things such as the formation of a fund that will be ring-fenced and will be contributed to probably by all 3 councils, that will be used for, its intended use would be to be the fund that responds to the priorities that need to be dealt with once the response strategy has been developed. So the plan is to put that before the new council after the elections. The reference groups will be formed late this year and will commence their work on developing strategies during the first 6-8 months of next year.
Thank you. Right, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I forgot to mention, there was a 5-page discussion paper prepared for that energy meeting. It might be useful to send that to the rest of the council.
Great idea. Okay, let's now then go to item 20, 21 and a brand new 22. Someone happy to move us into public excluded? Pardon me? 20, 21, 22. New page over. Well, it's the late item on appointment. Yeah. Someone happy to move in that direction? Thank you, Councillor Pipe. Seconded, Councillor Scott. Put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. The contrary, no.